Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Chassie said she just won her trivia contest, with me being her favorite podcaster. That was the question, but for some reason she is convinced I'm to pay her the double Jeopardy winnings, so we'll work on that later. We have a terrific guest lined up for tonight. We'll be discussing his captivating books with, I think, his combo sci-fi, ancient history themes. You've seen Dr. ARLAN Andrews on Ancient Aliens, discussing ancient technology. ARLAN has had a career in engineering, and he's worked in the White House Science Office and at the White Sands Missile Range. He has a great book on a unique Peruvian sculpture entitled Killarumiyoq, called the Shadow-Machine. The guest is already laughing at me. That's becoming more of a standard practice. Each show is just getting weirder. We'll also be discussing his Thaw. It's the first book in a trilogy of life during the upcoming Ice Age. You can learn more about ARLAN at sigmaforum.org or attend one of his Ancient Kentucky monthly meetings. Hi, ARLAN. How are you?
Doing well, Mark. Thank you. And by the way, that is pronounced Killarumiyoq. Killarumiyoq.
Okay, Killarumiyoq. Okay. Really screwed that one up. Okay. Maybe with more practice during the show, I'll get it right. I wrote it down phonetically. Maybe that might help. But
it's a Quechua name, so it's hard to do in English.
Okay. Okay. So, we have so much to cover tonight. Let's kind of just jump into the Killarumiyoq book first, and one of your Ancient Aliens colleagues wrote the foreword. Chris Dunn, very nice guy. He has a terrific book, The Giza Power Plant. So I'm sure many of the listeners are familiar with Chris's many appearances on Ancient Aliens, looking at the science and engineering. You're bringing a similar approach to your writings as well. Can you explain what your approach is to understanding a structure such as Killarumiyoq?
Okay, first I might, excuse me, my allergies. I might mention to the listeners what Killarumiyoq is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rainbow-shaped sculpture embedded in limestone, about 30 miles northeast of Cusco, Peru, in the Sacred Valley of the Inca. I came across it. I was on my way to something else, and I happened to see a sign, and we went over to look at it, and I saw this rainbow-shaped sculpture cut in the side of a huge limestone rock. The sculpture is about 9 feet wide and about 3 feet high and about 2 feet deep. It's reclined at about 45 degrees. And I thought, wow, this is spectacular. And the inner part of it, of the rainbow, is parabolic shaped. I said, well, this has got to be a solar calendar. That tells me it's a solar calendar. Anything to do with parabolas is a solar calendar. So that night we went back to Cusco in the hotel. I got the laptop out and started looking up. I said, I want to read all about this. This is interesting. There was nothing other than a government pamphlet saying it's there. There was absolutely nothing archaeological about it. So we went back out there and took a lot of pictures, and I hired the local guide, Brian Forster, to take measurements for me because I had to get back to the U.S. And over the years, I had him go out half a dozen times and take a lot of photographs, a lot of measurements. But what I wanted to do, I wanted to study this thing, but I couldn't be there to get pictures of it all the time. So I thought, well, I'll make a 3D CAD model, computer-aided design model of it. Mm-hmm. And with that 3D model, then I can bring the sun in at any time and do anything I want to and see how the shadows work. Because I suspected when I first saw it the way the shadows would work, that every other sundial in history, anywhere in the world, has got a pointer on it somewhere. That's called a gnomon, Gnomon. This one had nothing. But the way I saw the shadows working, I said, this thing might work without that. That would be unique in all the world and all of history if it's true. And so I made some very simple models using a program called SketchUp. And I said, my gosh, this thing is going to be able to tell us when the solstices are. And so I had Brian go out and photograph it, and the photographs he took proved that my model was right. I predicted how the shadows would be on the solstice of June. That's the end of the year in South America in the old days, the end of the year and the beginning of the year. The sun is at a position for about 4 days. It doesn't really move at around noontime. And even today, the Inca and Peruvians celebrate what they call Inca or Inti Raymi. Inti, I-N-T-I, is the name of their name for the sun god. And Rami is a celebration. So Inti Raymi, there's 4 days of parties in Peru. Believe me, 24 hours a day. I was there later on in 2017, and the music and the parades never stopped. It was great. But anyhow, getting back to it, there was no archaeological writing anywhere that I could find about this Killarumiyoq sculpture or its unique properties. And so I thought, well, I'll write something up. And it took a long time to get the models right, to try to get the shadows proper, so I wound up with approximate models. And so I wrote the book hoping that the real archaeological community would get out there and study this thing, maybe do a 3D scan of that whole huge rock and find out exactly what's going on, make it perfect, whereas mine is approximate. And that's what I did. And as far as I know, this is the first time anybody's ever used 3D CAD computer modeling to study an ancient structure like that to see what it does. And it was very interesting. It's time-consuming because I tried to get it perfect, but I couldn't because we don't have perfect measurements. But the model works. If you read the book or read the articles that are coming out about it, you'll see that it tells when the solstices are in December, in June. And not only that, but at a certain point during the June solstice, there's a hole cut in the surrounding rock where the sun shines through onto that rainbow sculpture. At the same time, about 4 other shadows line up. So there's half a dozen things that happen all at once. So if you're an ancient person watching this thing, you're the guy that's responsible for telling them when the year ends. All these things happen within a few minutes of each other. You can say, okay, Bob, Ika, the year now starts, the year now ends. And my interest in it is that there was nothing else like it that I could find anywhere in history.
Arlan, can you keep your phone still? It was getting muffled.
He's dropped, Mart.
Oh, okay. Let me send him a message.
I think it was interference of some sort.
Okay.
Well, I have 361. He's back.
Okay.
That telephone died on me. The handheld I had. Sorry.
Okay.
You can edit this, right?
You weren't gone long enough to really cause any major problems. So, Arlan, let's talk about the description of this site. There's, you gave the dimensions of the rainbow. And when people see, taking measurements and standing next to it and, doing other calculations, it's actually a tiny, sculpture. But what else is in the area? Is it like part of a complex?
All right. Well, the rock it's embedded in is probably 80 to 100 feet wide and 60 feet tall. An interesting part of it, and an integral part of it, is there is a rock outcrop above that stone circle that has also been carved. That casts an overhead shadow. And those overhead shadows are integral to the operation of the sculpture itself. While I was watching, I sat there, a stone about, I call it Shamans Stone, about 25 feet east of it. I was sitting there while my son and Brian Forster were going around the rest of the site. I was so interested in it. I sat there for a couple of hours and watched these shadows. And I said, this overhead shadow, when it comes down and touches this one parabolic arc, that's telling me something. And then there are a total, at the top there's a keystone, I call it a wedge, a keystone-shaped sculpture or flat area, trapezoid. And there are 3 trapezoids along each side. And where they meet, there are permanent markers between the two. And so it looks like the hands of a watch to me. If you look up on YouTube, Brian Forster's Hidden Ika channel, there's one, he made a video of that day of us there back in 2012. And I said, it looks like a watch, a watch, but more of a calendar than a watch. But you can see the shadows. So I went there again in 2017 to verify take the final measurements and verify. And I used video and everything else, and I showed the shadows operating as I said they would. And so I have proof it does work it works that way. It might do other things in addition to that. Another feature that occurs that I noticed, and I noticed from the photographs Brian had taken, and then I went down in 2017 and looked at it, at least during the solstice, maybe other times of the year, but at least during the solstice time, during a certain time of the day, it looks like the shadow of a large shadow of a condor alights on the structure itself. And in the book, I point out what's what on it. And up and down the Sacred Valley of the Ica there are other places where the shadow.
And Arlan, what role does Condors play in the Inca or Mayan histories?
Well, this would be the Mayans at Central America. All the Indian cultures apparently viewed the condor as a sacred bird, so it's a big cultural thing. The condor represented things in the sky. The puma, mountain lion, represented things on the ground. And there are other places in Peru that the shadow of a puma appears. This place, both of them do, 6 months apart. And then for things underground, the serpent is for underground. So apparently the Inca culture recognized, and other Indian cultures recognized 3 different spirit animals, I guess. The condor for the sky, the puma for on the earth, and the serpent for underground. I didn't see the serpent activity there, but there might be. If we had somebody with a camp out there or have a webcam on site 24/7 for a year, no telling what would turn out. Unfortunately, from what I've been reading lately and the things I've been getting from the State Department, Peru is not safe to go to anywhere. So, unfortunately.
So,
but the condor appears in other places all over the Sacred Valley.
Okay. So when you are, first learning about this sculpture, and you sit in the Shamans Seat, you are bringing your trained engineering mind to look at this. So how do you approach analyzing what some possibilities that you may think that what it could be? When you get home, you're going to go have access to more written material, possibly more written materials about the Incan culture. But what are you when you first start analyzing it? What are you thinking with your engineering training?
Well, the first thing an engineer does when you're faced with a problem, measurements. Take measurements. You can't argue with the measurements. Take the dimensions, the angles, the orientation, and start off not with anything in mind. I admit when I first thought, I thought it's a solar calendar because there's that parabolic thing, and the parabolic sculptures around the rest of the world always mean something to do with a solar calendar. And so I took the measurements. I made a simple model just in a few hours. And I said, wow, it looks like if this thing is oriented right and my dimensions are right, that these shadows are going to show up at the solstices. That's very important for an agricultural civilization to know when the seasons begin. I mean, it's a matter of life or death. If they plant at the wrong time, they can't harvest. be found.
Makes sense.
So that was very important to all societies around the world. First off, it starts with agriculture, and then eventually it becomes a ritual. And they probably have other symbolic meanings to it too. But so that's what I did. You can't argue with the measurements. You got the measurements. I put the 3D CAD system, and then, my goodness, the shadows look like it's going to happen this way. And that's why I asked Brian to go out there on the solstice itself for about an hour and photograph it every few minutes. And the shadows acted just like the model did, and even showed some other things. And then when I went back and looked at my photographs, when I was out there in April of 2012, I saw, wow, the sun is shining through at a certain time. And so I ran my model back to that time, and the model came out showing the hole and the sun and everything else. And wow, it's hard to argue with that. So to me, that was evidence that it was operating by a way that could be predicted by the models. And so then I started looking at it and like, wow, what else could it do? What else does it do? And then there's a lot of other features in there. Too much to go into detail on talking here, but and I'll bet, as I say in the book, Chris Dunn was an inspiration for me because I went to Egypt with him in 2008. I wrote an introduction to his second book, The Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, and I saw what Chris could do by applying engineering analysis, engineering experience, the things that other people have looked at but did not understand. And I've been interested in ancient civilizations and stuff forever, and all my life. It's from a little kid, and it was kind of interesting that here's something that nobody else has looked at. Maybe look at it, and I found out things nobody's ever found. I'll admit now, about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, I sent a copy of my book to a professional archaeologist who has studied the Andean cultures, written lots of papers, and asking for comments. I have had nothing back. Early on, when I first started this back in 2012, I asked archaeologists at some universities about it, and most of them never even heard of it, so they weren't very interested. So I said, okay, I'll write the book myself. I'll do the research, and I did. It's out there, and some of the in the book I did say these are facts. You can go see these things occur at this time. You can't argue with that. It's there. And then I have a lot of speculations about what else might be, and those can be argued about. And I might be wrong, I might be right, but at least I want to get people interested in it. I think the place is unique enough, spectacular enough, that it ought to be classified as a World Heritage Site. It ought to be a tourist destination. Back whenever Peru can open up to tourism again, without all the crime and everything they're having down there. And it'd be nice to bring tourism to that little village nearby. The people are dirt poor there. It would be great for them to have a tourist destination. Mainly, I want people to appreciate the genius of whoever it was who designed this thing. Now, when I first posted pictures of this on Facebook back in 2012 when I got back from Peru, people say, oh, it was melted in by lasers. It was done this by machining. And no. If you look at it, and I have all the detailed pictures, it was chipped out. In a few places, it looked like it's almost like a shovel or a big chisel or something. But most of it is, you can tell, thousands and thousands of chips. So they chipped it out with stones or other tools. They might have had some metal tools we haven't found yet, but there's nothing alien or Atlantean technology involved in this. I don't want people to attribute it to something else. There were some geniuses back in the Indian times, Inca or maybe before. We don't know when this thing was made. There was a genius that figured out conceptually how to do it. And then they applied the workmen to it, and I think I estimated in the book probably it took a year, 18 months work to get it. How it was done now, as an engineer, I was thinking, oh, how did they calculate and design this thing? And my wife, better engineer than I was in this case, she said, if it was me, hon, I would make a terracotta model of it first, mud, and then I would tweak it during the year to get the shadows I wanted. And once I had it perfect, then I would tell the guys to start chipping away at the stone. It's a lot easier to mess around with a mud model than it is to try to correct a mistake in the stone. So I gave her credit for it.
Okay. She deserves it.
Oh, yeah. She, but like I said, whoever it was, somebody conceived of this thing. Something that had never been done before, or probably have never been done since. And I just think people need to realize that genius comes in all kind of colors and packages and cultures. And this is one example of it that's been overlooked, in my opinion. And I want to bring people's attention to it and get it studied. That's not the only genius sculpture in Peru. I was there to study another one, but that's another whole book, another whole study.
Well, I'm curious about. You just brought up, we aren't. There's probably some type of chiseling, percussion flaking, going on. But we don't get it doesn't seem like the same precision as we get from those H blocks. Is that a Puma Punku?
Yeah. Well, Chris, those H blocks, those things are individually cut. They're not uniform. Each one is different. So they were chipped out too.
Okay.
Now, this one, I addressed this in the book. This one was not meant for a lot of public display. There's no area to stand around where you can put 1,000 people and look at it. You probably had one guy called a Yanka or a shaman 25 feet away on that conveniently placed stone, which is why they built it to start with, I think, because they already had a stone up there somebody could sit on. You look at it from a distance, it looks nice and smooth. The places that needed to be smooth are smooth. The places that could be rough, they left alone. There was no reason. If you look at pictures of it, parts of it are smooth close up, but a lot of it is very rough. So, like true engineers do, true artisans and artists do, you do what's necessary for the function, and you don't do any more. Why spend years doing something that after a month is good enough? So it was not meant to be pretty. It was not meant to be, in my opinion, looking at it from a 21st century, Anglo guy, it was not meant to be pretty. It was meant to be functional. And they put the work into the areas that needed to be functional. That inner arc at the bottom of the rainbow thing there is very precise, very sharp. The little hour marks along the side, if you want to call them that, those are meant to be shadows. They're not precise, but they're precisely located. But from a distance, they look like marks from an analog wristwatch. And they're good enough. It's not meant to be perfect. If you want perfection, you want to look at those vases like Chris has studied over Egypt, get down to 10,000th of an inch. Those are meant to be handled and to be appreciated. This one is this is a tool, engineered tool with a big rock. The guy looked at it. Okay, it's the solstice. It's first day of winter, first day of spring, whatever. And also, you can look at the equinoxes on it too. And one analysis I did, probably speculative, that you could probably tell the months of the year by looking at certain shadows too. And there might have been more detail than that, but I couldn't determine any more than that. Okay. It wasn't a work of art. It was a piece of equipment.
Okay. So, with sculpting, with the sculpting that went on in and to cut away the rock and going into it a little bit. It's going to leave debitage, but you say that was not found. It seems very similar to the descriptions of that hilltop along the Nazca lines that was just sheared off, but the refuse really wasn't just thrown over the hill. It was seemed like it was removed from the entire site. So that seems to be a pattern that is going on throughout South America. I just thought that was an interesting fact.
I did a calculation in the book showing how I estimated the volume that was taken out, and from there is where I estimated how long it took to do it. But if you look at the size of it, I mean, in modern times it'd be a dozen wheelbarrows worth. They might have just thrown it down at the bottom somewhere, or they might have coated that off somewhere else, or there's grass and dirt at the bottom. It might be covered up. No excavations have ever been done around there. Nobody's ever looked at it. So, but again, it wasn't very much. I mean, a dozen wheelbarrows, big wheelbarrows, so many cubic feet. I forget how many cubic feet. It wasn't that much. So it wouldn't have been much to get rid of it. And there are underground, the archaeological area itself, the Killarumiyoq archaeological site, they mentioned in the government pamphlet that there were some, French drains around there. So that would have been the debris like that. A French drain, is a dirt ditch with rocks in it so that water circulates down through it. And they probably used it. They could have used it for that. I think those cultures that were right on the edge of subsistence probably didn't throw anything away that they could use elsewhere.
Okay, well, that makes sense. Help with drainage. Does, since we're talking about the shaman sitting in his seat watching the summer solstice on December 21st, does the reversal of the seasons have any impact on interpreting this the Shadow-Machine?
Yeah, there's a symmetry in there, and I explain that in detail in the book. In the June solstice, the winter solstice, a vertical shadow aligns with the top left part of that keystone wedge at the top. And then on the December solstice, and you can tell that because the overhead shadow comes down and touches that. On the December solstice is a little bit different. It's the shadow comes down at a place called solar noon, and the shadow is a little bit different. But it's symmetrical. It's explained in the book. It's hard to explain it without the pictures in front of you. But yeah, the 3D model showed what would happen. Brian went out there and photographed it for me, and sure enough, there it is. So there's 2 points. There's a solar noon when the sun is highest, and there's overhead shadow. Those two things have a symmetrical relationship on the left and right side of that wedge. It's explained in the book. It's difficult to say here, but then on the equinox, the shadows, the March and September, the shadows aligned with another one of those edge markers each time, and the shadow comes down. And it was elegant as far as I was concerned. I was surprised when I did these things. I thought, my gosh! And then every time he went and photographed me for me at those times, it worked. And I said, well, amazing how much you can do with just an approximate model.
No, I was impressed, with the photo. I enjoyed the whole book, but you did have many captivating photos of the sculpture. Or I enjoyed it, and we really don't know the date of construction.
No, it's at least 500 years old, because that's about when the Incas were wiped out. When the thing fell apart. There was a Inca, somebody, I can't recall his name now. He did give orders for calendars to be built all over the country. And I thought, well, that's cool. Maybe this is one of them. However, there's not another one like this anywhere in Peru or anywhere else anybody's found. Now, if they found another one 50 miles away or 100 miles away like this, that'd be nice. That would be probably dated. That's when the Inca Yupanqui did that. But this is all by itself. Just looking at the weathering of the sharp edges, it doesn't look like it's many, many thousands of years old. Around Cusco, there's a lot of stones that obviously are very, very old. And the carvings and things of them are worn quite a bit by wind and rain and everything. But I had tried to determine by that hole where Eddy, the sun shines through. I looked at what time of day and the angles and everything involved were on that, and tried to say, okay, how far back in time would that work? But it's so all my measurements are so inaccurate, not precise. It's hard to say. It looks like, I went back a couple thousand years on that SketchUp 3D modeling. You could put in any time of year for thousands of years back, any time of day and everything else, and watch what the shadows do. I tried to determine it that way, but I really couldn't. This thing could be 1,000 years old or it could be 500 years old. We don't know what culture did it. I would suspect, well, of course, the Inca culture was only around for like a couple 150 years or so, So the preceding culture before them could have made it. That's why I want somebody to look at it. Somebody that's a real archaeologist and big 3D scanners and big computers and everything else, look at it and see where I went, where I was approximate. Maybe they could be precise. I just want other people to look at it.
The Peruvian government really, they have this super unique archaeological site, and they really aren't having it researched by their museums, or aren't really pushing for it to be a World Heritage Site, anything like that. It just seems like it's just kind of like out there by itself.
One of the purposes of writing the book, first of all, I would like to get credit for being the discoverer of this thing, of what it does. That I am, that's important to me. But the most important thing is to get other people to go look at it. I want to bring it to their attention. I don't know if anybody in Peru has seen this thing, Now, there's going to be an article about it in the Mensa Bulletin here in the next month or so. That's the international magazine for Mensa. And there's another magazine that might be out there, too, and also the Ancient American magazine. I'm hoping that somebody down there at some point will pay attention to it and look at it. They mentioned it, and I've got a big calendar here in my office that every year in August, for some reason, they have a big celebration, an Ethiopian celebration at Killarumiyoq. On the other side of the big stone, out in a great big area, there's a place where thousands of people can gather, and they do. This one is tucked back in the corner, like just a couple of people are going to look at it. That was not it wasn't a big celebration thing for people to look at it. Now, around Cusco, before the Spanish destroyed it, they did have great big pillars, and they had great big, from what I understand, Garcillo de Vasca wrote a book about it, the guy who was there when it happened. They had these big pillars, and you could look at all the solar calendar stuff going on, and everybody went out there and saw the solstices and the equinoxes and everything for the shadows, but the Spanish tore all that stuff down. Apparently those things must have been about the size of Stonehenge. And so, like I said, Stonehenge, or those great big things that they had at Cusco, those big calendars, were for public use. That would be like the Big Ben clock in London. This right here would be like the grandfather clock in your hallway. This is just a small instrument equipment, a calendar or pocket watch, as compared to the great big things. So
that's one.
Stories,
that's one of the interesting things about the Shadow-Machine is that it seems like it is such a small structure in a confined space that it was more used for almost like a private situation instead of just say all the people who could walk to Stonehenge for the summer solstice, they're all there, or in gathered inside of the huge ring at Avebury, or outside of it, watching from the West Kent Longboroughs, something like that. You could, those places seem like they're a lot more public oriented, and this all the points you make in your book are just really make it a fascinating place. It's just so much different than other timekeeping places around the world.
Yeah, right downhill from this are the megalithic remains of a building. There's a creek that runs through it, a waterfall. There was a building down there. I don't know if it's a temple or a place where people lived or anything else. So there was stuff going on there. As I say in the book, I think the reason it was here is because, first off, somebody's survey. Okay, we're going to build this thing. Where are we going to build it? Okay, here's a stone there. It's got a big flat face. We can work on that. It's got an overhead rock. We can use that. It's got a rock I can sit on here and look at it. Let's put it here. And in the book itself, of course, I show what hypothetical way of how they built it. They could have built it. And the way the rock was located, the size of it, this viewing stone, the Shamans stone, that was probably the reason they put it there. Now, the thing is, if you moved that same construction 50 miles away, it would not work. It would have to be oriented differently. The design would probably work, but you have to orient it right at different angles to get the thing to work. So it was unique for that spot. They chose that spot because it was convenient. It had all the features it needed. And I look at it as an engineering project. Okay, we got to build. The boss wants us to build a calendar right here, saying when the seasons start. What are we going to do? We got this much space. We got this much time. We got this many people. Let's put it here. Let's do it. Here's this model we're going to make first, put it in place, make sure it works. It'll take a year or two to get that set up. And then once we get that done, we'll bring in the crew to do the chipping, do it. And in a year or two, we'll have a calendar that will tell us when the seasons start and a lot more. But some people have said, well, maybe it was a moon thing, a shadow of the moon. Well, I don't know. It's hard enough to get this thing to work knowing the sun. You try to stick a full moon in there over hundreds of years, and hey, that's too complex for me. I'm just an engineer. I'm not a mathematician. I don't have a program that would stick that in there for me, and I don't think the shadows from the moonlight are going to tell you anything, but sunlight tells you exactly when the seasons begin. So again, it's the engineering viewpoint as opposed to an archaeological or anthropological viewpoint. The engineering viewpoint is it's a big machine. I call it a shadow machine because it produces shadows. Program, it produces shadows according to certain inputs. It's a machine. I got to build a machine for the boss. I'm going to build it here. If it looks pretty when we get through it, that's fine, but that's not important. We got to have the curves just right. We got to have the markers just right. We got to have the shadows just right. The overhead shadows just right. Once we got that stuff, that's good enough. We don't have to pretty it up. It's not here for 1,000 people to see. It's just for one or two guys during the year to come out and look at it. And that's a different way of looking at things. It's not always religious ritual or superstitious something. It's a damn machine. I mean, that's the way Chris looked at a lot of this stuff in Egypt. That's the way I looked at a lot of things. I mean, it can be more than one thing. They built cathedrals in Europe, supposedly, just for religious worship, but it was a community thing. People did it out of love. They weren't forced to do it. They spent their lives working in cathedrals to make something. In those places, they made it pretty because they wanted people to look at it. It's supposed to be a model of heaven, represent religious figures, so they want it to be very nice. But I imagine down in the basements of the cathedrals, they weren't properly finished or anything else. They were just hacked out, whatever we need. So people do different things. It's not always, I get so tired that's a trope, a meme, or a cliche. People say, well, it's religious purposes. Because many times when you say that, go any further. That's what irritates me when people say ancient aliens built all this stuff. Well, once you say that, you got to quit. There's no more to be learned. If an alien culture built something, you can't learn. But I don't think anything on Earth we've ever seen has been built by any aliens. And any engineer, scientist, technician, or artisan can go look at something and get a different interpretation of it than my interpretation of what some archaeologists look at. And everything's got to be. And I don't want to pick a fight with them because I respect what archaeologists do. I can't imagine spending 50 years learning how to read hieroglyphics, future predicative tenses of hieroglyphics. I'm glad people do that. But I'm more interested in the machine part of it, the engineering part of it, like the pyramids, how they were built. That's cool. To me, the genius of the pyramids were who the hell conceived of that, arranged the resources of it, designed it, planned it, and got the logistics going to build these things. Now, I would love to know the details of the construction, but to me, the organization of it, the conceptual design, is far, far, far more transcendent than the actual building of it. And that's here. The same thing on a much smaller scale with Killarumiyoq. The conceiving of it, the genius of conceiving of that, I can't hardly imagine myself. I can't conceive of how somebody conceived of that to start with. How they did it, but getting out, that's mundane. transcendental part, design of it.
Arlan, are you finding that the technology from this group of sculptors and engineers that they had a vision of their monuments that was similar to let's just say the ancient Egyptians, where if we go with Chris's Giza power plant and all the technology that the tour guides say, but like putting a wet log in a crack and letting it expand, that's how it's going to cause the rock to break apart. But Chris is arguing that they had stone cutting machines. Are you finding that with your travels around the world and talking with Chris and seeing these, having him demonstrate his theories, by being on site with him, are these people from way back in time? Are they much more advanced than many people today are giving them credit for? Seems like a lot of the government agencies aren't really promoting that aspect of these ancient cultures.
Well, I'll leave all the Egyptian stuff to Chris. He's done that in detail. He showed me things behind the back muscles of big sculptures there in Luxor. The back of the great big 20-foot high statues of Ramses. These are perfectly sculptured little rivulets, I guess you'd say, down the back of this leg. There are dozens of them there. They are perfect. I mean, like you said, within thousandths of an inch in parallel. And those things, we can't conceive how they can be done by hand. There had to be some sort of machinery involved. Chris and I have different discussions about different ideas about what those machines might be. But we looked at another one, and it's in his book. And I took a lot of pictures of it. I looked at pictures of it yesterday, in fact. At Abu Rawash, there's a stone that's about 3 feet by 5 feet by about a foot thick, that's laying out beside this unfinished pyramid, or destroyed pyramid, whichever way you look at it. It's supposedly, according to Hawass and ancient alien stuff, this is a restricted military area. You have to get permission to go to. We took a taxi out to it twice when Chris and I were there. And this thing has got, you can see where the stone originally had a rough surface, but there's an arc cut through it. And you look under the detail microscope or magnifying glass, and you can see about every 60,000th of an inch for 3 feet across it. There's a cut. And you can see where whatever the blade it was, one time skipped the place and gouged out a chunk, like in real life happens, So this was a machine, and it was a fast machine. It was, if you have a slow machine you're grinding something with, if you make a mistake, you stop. But if you have a fast machine, it's going to make a cut and a gouge before you can do anything about it.
Right.
I call it the rose red Rosetta Stone of Abu Rawash because it's kind of pinkish stone, and that right there, to me, demonstrates some level of saw cutting technology that they had when they built that pyramid or destroyed the pyramid or whatever it was. And you can't argue with it. No, my problem was that I was on I had a few seconds in another movie called Revelations of the Pyramids. So some French guys interviewed me back in 2008 in D.C., and they were saying, what do you want science to do that you're not doing today? I said, what I want to do is I want the academic archaeologists who have never been in a machine shop, never built anything, constructed anything in a factory or anything else. I want them to lead, but I want them to listen to engineers, artisans, technicians, because we have different viewpoints that can help them. We're not trying to destroy archaeology. My God, we want to help it. But that's what I said on that TV show, that we want to get other people involved in it. And it doesn't seem, every other science in the world welcomes amateurs. Without amateur astronomy, we wouldn't have half the comets and asteroids that we have today. And, nobody expects an amateur to do as well as a James Webb telescope. But on the other hand, an amateur astronomer can find an asteroid coming in or a comet or something nobody else has ever seen. And by analogy, that's what I want us to do. I want people to listen to Chris Dunn. I want people to look at what I found out down there in Peru and get other people involved. There are things that are evident to engineers, technicians, artisans, artists, sculptors. They're not evident to somebody who spent their life studying what other people said about other people's discoveries. Be on site, take the measurements, speculate, hypothesize, and prove it. And to me, with the 3D CAD system software that we have today, anybody can do it. It doesn't take you have to be an engineer to learn to use 3D CAD stuff. In fact, with some of this new artificial intelligence stuff that's going around, the Chat GPT and stuff like that, I haven't used it yet, but you probably ask your AI helper there to call up a 3D CAD system and draw you one of these things in a few seconds. In fact, I just thought of that. I might just try that here soon. I might just get on there. And I've had them to do covers for me. I've had them to do covers, but just text description of a cover, and it comes up, wow, that's what I wanted. Might ask them to do a 3D CAD system, and I don't know, show me how the pyramids were built.
When I saw Chris's lecture at the Serpent Mound, he showed a face of whatever pharaoh it was, and
Ramses, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The whole face is perfectly symmetrical. He had all these lines on it, from the forehead to the chin, and both sides of the face were the exact same dimensions, and tip of the nose to the cheek or ear, it was the same on both sides. He's postulating, if you're using hand chisels, are you going to get that precise accuracy, or were they using, the ancient Egyptians using some kind of technology that has been lost in time? We may have rediscovered it now.
Again, I leave those details to Chris. What I did cover in that introduction to his book, Lost Technologies in Ancient Egypt, was people ask, where are the tools? Where are the tools? Well, I'll tell you, when the civilization, in the Egyptian civilization, it was around for 4,000 or 5,000 years, but it collapsed several times. When a civilization collapses, the most important thing that scavengers want after that, the survivors want, is finished metal. You know, finished metal can become spears or fish hooks or knives or whatever else. If our civilization collapsed and we have a post-apocalyptic thing and people are wandering around, every automobile that there is going to be cut up for sheet metal to make spear points and knives and fish hooks and needles. And, you know, over 1,000 years, anything that's finished metal will be recycled.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have something that's thousands of years old, now my dream and Chris's dream, of course, is that someday when Hawass is gone, somebody else over there will find a workshop full of the old equipment that was ignored, you know, was not touched. But barring that, finished metal is very, very precious. Because if you have a primitive society, it's going to be hard to go out and mine ore and refine it and process it and stuff. But if you got stuff laying around just for the taking of it, you'll take it and you'll cut it up and you'll make things out of it. And if they had machine tools, that's probably what happened to them. Chris can talk to you about it. Like I said, I'll leave all that precision work to him. The stuff in South America, all the stuff he saw in South America, none of that even approaches anything that we saw in Egypt. Well, there are some finished stones at Coricancha that look pretty nice, but there are no artifacts that we've ever found in South America that I'm aware of that approach anything that was done in Egypt and other places. But that's why I'm excited about the Killarumiyoq sculpture, but it is evidence of advanced thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only, to me, the only real precision artifact that's left down there that I know about. Then there's another stone that I was going to look at, and I've written articles about it, called the segue stone. That's about another 30 miles beyond the Killarumiyoq. That's got a lot of carvings on it, and that's what I went down to study when we came across this one. But the segue stone, you can look it up on Wiki. I made a Wikipedia entry on it. Someday I might write more articles about it. But those are two places that, to me, are evidence of advanced thinking. There might be other ones there. I haven't been all over South America. There might be other places down there that also show this same conceptual thing. The segue stone, I was in contact with the people from Columbia University of the Andes, and when they looked at the segue stone, they said there's somebody with the brain of a Newton, Isaac Newton, worked on this thing, and I agree with her. And the same thing here with Killarumiyoq. It had to be a world-class thinker or thinkers to come up with that concept, in my opinion. I would like for archaeologists to go look for other evidences of this person or this school of thought or whatever it was. You know, who knows what we'll find.
Yeah. Okay. So, Arlan, since you were just talking about the ancient Egyptian civilization collapsed a few times, and that could be a nice segue into Thaw, and you're talking about the Killarumiyoq monuments, and 30 miles away was another place, and you talked about another like the pillars over the hill from it. So you do have these different cultures connected by a river in your thought. So let's kind of set the stage for your first book in this series, and you have the third of the trilogy recently just came out. So get into what seems like a prehistoric culture in the north, or in the icy areas.
Okay, well, now I'm switching now from my nonfiction work to science fiction. I write science fiction as well because I like weird things and strange things, and I guess that's fine on your show. Okay, the Thaw trilogy. It's also called the Chronicles of Shadowfall, for a reason you'll know if you read the book. But there are 3 books: Thaw, Melt, and Flow. That's FLOE, like ice flow. When I was in Peru looking at these ancient ruins back in 2012, around Sacsayhuaman, outside of Cusco, you see these big stones the size of a house around and thrown around, broken. I thought they must have been heck of earthquakes at some time in the past. And I was thinking about that and thinking about it. When I got back to the airport in Lima a few days later, I was thinking, some of these stones might be 10,000, 15,000 years old. I wonder what will be left of our civilization in 10,000 or 15,000 years, say like after the next ice age. So I sat down on my little laptop and started writing a story, thinking about it. And the way I write, I don't create it. I watch it. And so the first thing I saw were these little bitty guys, really short, like 2.5 feet tall, dark skinned, riding on birds like emus, ostriches, but they call them emus. I was like, what the heck is this? So what are these guys doing? And so I start writing it, and they are looking at a glacier that's miles high. Now, north of here, up in Indiana, they had glaciers in the Ice Age that were 2 miles thick. And they scoured everything before them. There was nothing left. And so as I wrote the story, and this was a story, a novella called Thaw. There was an analog magazine back in 2013, I guess. It was a cover story. It shows a little guy sitting on top of an emu with a spear and a bunch of things in front of a glacier. Okay, there's been an ice age. It's wiped out our whole civilization. And these guys are survivors of it. And the reason they're so small is their ancestors were caught when the glaciers were formed. The glaciers formed around them, and there was a scabland that the glaciers didn't form in, but they were caught in the middle of it for 30,000 years. And so the lack of resources, I came up with all this later. I read the story first, or saw the story and wrote it. But when the editor and the copy editor asked me, well, how did this happen? Well, over there in Indonesia now, they had found the remains of these people they call hobbits. They were only like 3 feet tall. They had been isolated on an island for a long time, and the amount of resources there meant that the survivors had to get smaller and smaller. They had miniature elephants and miniature people. The same thing happened in my story up in this would be the upper peninsula of Michigan. And the funny thing was, when I was telling the story to some people at a meeting up in Upper Peninsula, they said, well, that's true. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, the last time the glaciers formed, they left this area open. The glaciers formed all around it. Well, my story, somehow the people were there. Now, the river that appears in the story,
the New River,
would be eventually would be the Mississippi River. And they are a fairly primitive culture. They're not Stone Age, but they don't have a lot of technology. But they ride these birds and they hunt wolves, and the wolves are their enemy, and the birds are the natural enemy of these wolves. And it builds a world there. The main thing is, their sky is always cloudy. They don't ever have a clear sky because at the bottom of this glacier for 100 miles, it's always clouds. So they have no measure of stars. They've never seen stars. The moon is just a glow to them, and the sun is it's there, but it doesn't cast shadows. It's just a mist all the time. And so the guys, one way or another, go down this river they run into another culture where people didn't experience the same thing. There's a solar priest culture down where we would call Memphis. And the Mississippi is a couple miles wide. They're down there, and they meet all these tall people who are different colors and different color hair. Their women look different, which they like a lot. And they run into different cultures. Meanwhile, while they're up near the glaciers, the people who live near the glaciers find craft, something they call it the gods. The glaciers are melting. That's why it's called Thaw. This is after the next ice age, after 30,000 years from now, the glaciers are melting. And they find the bodies of some tall people, and then they find a craft, an aircraft, and they have adventures with that. And they wander down to the solar people down the river. Since the world has changed so much, when all that water in the glaciers, it lowered the ocean level hundreds of feet, such that in their time, what we call the Gulf of Mexico, the bottomland is dry, except for a couple places. And down in that bottomland, there's yet another culture. And it's an absolute dictatorship, a monarchy run by, they call it the motherland, by women. And the cultural clashes, every place they go, they have a culture clash. These guys, there's two. It turns out the farms land is where the story starts. These little guys and their emus. Again, they're about 2.5 feet tall. Their skin is the color of dark oak. They treat women like some cultures treat women on Earth today. I won't get into that, where that is, in the Middle East. But the women are just property, just there for reproducing and other recreations. And so the whole thing is about culture clash. These guys are very naive. They don't know anything. They go to these other cultures. It turns out this craft that the other people have dug out has got a means of propulsion that they can fly in it. And they finally learn how to do that. One of them does. And that takes them to all these other adventures. So they go from their Stone Age culture run by a chief down to almost an Egyptian-like culture, ancient Egyptian-like culture run by solar priests, down to a medieval culture run by women. And they get into all kind of trouble. And they also meet some other cultures that are from the Indies. In fact, people read all these books, they'll understand. The sculpture at Killarumiyoq has been reproduced. It's down in that bottomland, the motherland. There's a great big sculpture they've made. When it describes it, you'll see it's exactly the same as the Killarumiyoq thing, except it's about 5 times as big. And it is used for ritual sacrifice. So, I don't know. I just watch these stories. I don't make it up. I just watch what they do. And then, so they learn a lot. Some of the natural instincts they have from where they grew up makes one of the brothers into a natural warrior, a bloodthirsty warrior. He starts off as a really nice guy. And in Tharn's lands, when males are born, they're always born as twins. You see that in the book. It's never explained, and it's never pointed out. It's just, that's the way it is. Females are born single, but males are always born twice. It's a genetic thing. Don't ask me where it comes from. So one of the brothers is outgoing, athletic, attracts women, is a good warrior, and the other brother is more thoughtful and analytical. Now, I will not say that reflects upon them at all, but they know it. But they get into all kinds of adventures and cultures, and one of the things I noticed in South America is a lot of hippie type, what I call hippie types or New Age type people. are looking for instant salvation, so they go down to this ancient Inca stuff, and they're trying to not only smoke stuff and take dope and crap, but they're trying to get rituals and do like the Inca did and get some kind of salvation. So I made fun of that in one of my Facebook posts because I saw a bunch of people there one day at a place called Tipon, where the hydraulic engineering of Incas has really demonstrated it still works after 500 years. A bunch of people worshiping over a water sluice. And I said, this would be like thousands of years from now, people at one of our sewage plants worshiping over a sewage place. People got all very angry with me. Same thing happened. Chris and I were in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, and we came across two women over there meditating, doing the Om thing. And I said at the time, Chris, can you imagine our descendants thousands of years from now meditating inside an air conditioning duct? He just laughed. The people there didn't appreciate it. But anyhow, I make fun of that in the book. In the book, they're going through these bottom lands. Somebody's built a great big pyramid, and they go inside the pyramid, and they find a great big disc at the bottom with a bunch of pipes sticking up. And they say this is a holy site, so they built a pyramid and they worship in there. And they can't read the writing, but the writing is there. And it turns out to be the wellhead of an oil company that was drilling. We know it. They don't know what it is in the future. They know it. I just threw that in there to make fun of that attribute people have, that tendency of people to worship ancient things they don't understand. So some stuff I moved out, but most of the story I just watched, and I watched a ordinary kid, a young guy, 15 years old, becomes, during the story, during the books, he becomes up to be about 20, and he becomes an absolutely bloodthirsty, ruthless warrior, and it makes him sick. He hates what he's become, but you'll see the circumstances require him to do that. And you see several innocent people who start off wanting democracy and freedom and everything else. You see them turn into tyrants. And you see all the characters develop. And the funny thing about it is the other writers, and they say the same thing happens. The characters take over, and they do what they want to do. You're just there trying to report it. Because in one of my books, I won't say which one of the main characters gets murdered. And I was shocked when I wrote that. I said, wait a minute. I just almost brought the tears. I didn't want that to happen. I watched it happen. I had to describe it. And I asked the other writers, did that ever happen to you? And they said, oh, yeah, all the time. The characters take over. So anyhow, the whole thing is about, I wanted science fiction. 30,000 years from now, we're not necessarily going to be traveling the galaxy and doing all the Star Wars and Star Trek stuff. There are other futures out there that, to me, are more probable. I mean, I hope that we are. I hope great-grandchildren are traveling to the stars. More than likely, the future is going to be more like the medieval Dark Ages, with warlords, with high-tech stuff. Dystopian. I'm afraid that, I never thought in the 21st century we'd be watching supposedly the second biggest military in the world trampling over innocent people and murder on a daily basis with missiles and stuff. And the same stuff like Genghis Khan, except now they got bombers and missiles, guns and stuff. I really think I want science fiction to talk about the future, but all the futures are not going to be glorious battles in space and all that stuff. My story is not the future, it's a future. There will be another ice age. Ice ages happen every 100,000 years, whether you like it or not. Got nothing to do with whether human beings are here or not. In fact, we are in a warm, we're in an interglacial period right now. And we are very fortunate to be warm because ice ages kill and the warmth blossoms. The human race does well when it's warm, and it dies when it's cold. There's a thing called the Milankovitch cycles. And you'll see it, and you can see the NOAA charts and the NASA charts, everything else. Every 100,000 years, there's an ice age, and some ups and downs in between. Right now, we are in an era that's not as warm as it used to be. Every week or so, you'll see that archaeologists or a glacier recedes in Norway or Russia or somewhere, and underneath it, they find the remains of a village. They find artifacts and stuff. Well, guess what? That meant thousands of years ago, it was warmer there. People lived there. And the glaciers formed since then is now retreating. So to me, the warmer it gets, the better. And it will change. Again, my son, I'm not the greatest science fiction writer or the most popular one or anything else like that, but I will say one thing: every one of my stories, every one of the articles, everything else I've ever done, each is individually different than anything else that's ever been, different from each other. I've never read a story before about when the next ice age comes. It destroys cultures. It rearranges cultures. In my books, this trilogy, Thaw, Melt, and Flow, the ice age comes up on us about 200 years from now by something happens on the sun, causes an ice age. But 200 years from now, we have many thousands of people living on the moon and some on Mars. It also the story covers what happens to those people that survived on the moon, the lunar colonies down underneath the moon, what happened to them, and how eventually at some point, with remnant ancient technology left over, the people on Earth make contact with the people on the moon. And that makes for an interesting culture clash as well.
Oh, I really enjoyed Thaw. Yeah. And one of the things that stuck out for me was it seems a little bit like the Shire from the Hobbit books. It's realistic, but there's some of the elements of it's a little bit of a fantasy land, but you could see yourself into that setting, and it's the characters are realistic, responding to the different environments that you discussed. You also work in like the pyramid example along the river. Most of the activity is taking place along this river that connects all the the different settings. The adventures that Rist and Rusk have do seem like they're based on what we know from ancient history. Some of these artifacts. You do create a very unique sci-fi world here on Earth. It is future. It's a little bit like Land of the Lost. It is. It seems like Marshall, Will, and Hawley went back into time, but they actually went into the future. I'm
not familiar with the show, so.
Oh, okay. Well, you had to be like
the Land of the
years.
Lost that I read was comic books way back in the 40s, and there was a totally different thing.
Just talking about the Slee Stacks and Saturday morning cartoons.
The one interesting thing is there's a magical cloth in that book called God's Cloth.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I visualized it. I saw what they were doing with it across a few years after that, I met a scientist who was actually working on stuff, and it really does exist. It's called graphene, and I didn't even know what graphene was at the time. I knew the name, I didn't know what it was. And this graphene has all the properties that God's cloth did, but I just made that up. I must have heard about it somewhere. I can't say it, but that God's cloth and the way the God's cloth is spread all the earth. I can't remember. Maybe in the second book, Melt, you see how that happened. And but it's just weird to me that, as I've mentioned before, I'm sure it's not automatic writing, but it feels like automatic writing. Every once in a while, like the pyramid thing, I do my own, but most of the time I'm just watching what they do. And they have this material, and they did all these magical things with it. It turns out it's a real material. We have it now, but we have it in very small areas. We don't have it by the bolts and the square miles like they do in the book, but we will. And then in the second book, Melt, you're in that same future, but then at the end of that book, the last 50 pages of the book, it tells how the Ice Age came on. It tells where that graphene God's cloth came from, and where these magic video spheres came from, and it all ties together. The ancestors of that Risk and Rusk, where they started, how they got there. No, I admit I had to make some of that up, but it all fits.
Okay, well, if we're talking about the upcoming Ice Age, you are getting into a little bit of the reversal of like the Shadow Machine is being observed on December 21st, like a reversal of the hemispheres. We can also get into, when people start reading the book, they may be thinking of the Ice Age from like 12,000 years ago, but since you do incorporate this interesting reversal theme, we could get into the younger so something like the Younger Dryas period causing the Ice Age that Risk and Rusk have to deal with. Does the Younger Dryas or some of these solar flares, something out there in space, create something that we will be experiencing, and it's just part of a cycle that already happened, that caused the last Ice Age to happen and eventually melt?
Well, actually, in that Younger Dryas events, that's the novel I'm working on now. That's another one. That's the next book. It's got nothing to do with this trilogy. I'm working on another historical conspiracy novel that involves the Younger Dryas. But no, you'll see, I won't give it away, but in the second book, it explains how that Ice Age happened. There's a solar flare, but the solar flare is caused by something else. And Dr. Robert Schoch, I think Barbara's had him on in the past, I've seen. He thinks that the Younger Dryas was done by solar flares. That's what wiped out things in the past. And it might be, I don't know. But I have a solar flare, but it's got a unique reason that it occurred, and I came up with that as an explanation by talking to my friend Stephanie Osborne, who's a writer down in Alabama. she suggested. I told her, Stephanie, I got to have a solar flare. What could cause that? So she told me. So that does what I needed. That, like I said, that part of the book I had to make up. I wasn't just watching that one. All the stuff that Wrist and Rusk was automatic writing, as far as I'm concerned. But now these are Milinkovitch cycles. You can look that one up. Every 100,000 years, there's an ice age. That's been going back for 500,000 years or longer. They can go that. They look at the ice cores that have been dug up from the Vostok cores down in Antarctica, and then the ones up in Greenland. And you see that the past has been a lot warmer than it is now. And this little so-called hockey stick, little global warming thing that we've experienced supposedly in the last 100 years doesn't even go up enough for the width of the line that they use to chart it on the graph. So we are due for another ice age. And when they happen, it's a matter, I think, not decades, but weeks. And I hope it holds off until I'm gone. I hope it holds off until I'm gone, because I'm right here in Kentucky, you're in West Virginia. It gets cold enough here. I'd hate to live in Alaska or Saskatchewan or somewhere, or Siberia. And when they do happen, anyhow, the Ice Age business is still thawing in my book, Flow. And there's the North Atlantic is still all frozen over, and there's another whole culture up there of ice pirates, a great big sled-driven sailboats. And our friends, Rist and Russ, get to meet them violently. And those guys get to come and invade Motherland. A lot of weird things happen. And at some point, when I get through the other books, I need to get back, because sequels keep popping up and prequels keep popping up. The characters. So how did we get here? What happened? What happened when the Gulf of Mexico went dry? How did the people settle down there? Why did they set up this motherland? How did they get this magic throne that communicates with the moon? And how did all this stuff happen? Hell, I don't know. I want to write the story so I can see for myself.
We've had other artists talk about automatic writing. Merle Fankhauser's done that with his music. He spoke about his conversation, the creative process that he discussed with John Lennon. How do you get these images, and where do you think this inspiration comes from? You talk about you're watching it unfold. How does create the muses come to you?
Well, I've discussed it with other writers, and some of us have something in common. I almost view it like there's a dark room in the back of my mind, back of my head somewhere. And sometimes I have an idea, and I write it down, and I give it back there. The door opens and grabs it. They slam the door, and then sometimes minutes later, hours, sometimes years later, the door opens and they throw out a manuscript, and I look at it. That's one of the things. It's not a friendly bunch. They slam the door, like this song, The Green Door. They slam the door and they throw stuff out. But that's kind of a metaphor for, I don't know, there's a subconscious part of the mind that generates all this stuff. And I guess it has the influences from everything we've ever read and done and seen. But I'll tell you, you mentioned the muses. It reminds me of music. I'll tell you how something happened. I've written a lot of songs. usually weird songs. Like I said, back in the 70s, I was writing a bunch for my friend, but occult country western songs don't seem to have a big market, you know. But back in the 70s, one night I was driving my little Spitfire convertible with a ragged rag top back from a friend's house, back to my house in Greensboro, North Carolina. It was a raging storm going on. We had lightning and wind, and the worst rainstorm I'd never been in, and I was kind of scared because the little Spitfire convertible just kind of blowing around the road. And all of a sudden I had this vision of a huge bonfire. I'm talking about, I can still see it, and a half-naked guy with a deer skin and the antlers, you know, just a loincloth, and maybe a beard dancing crazily around this bonfire like some kind of Celtic pagan thing. And then this music hit me, and I'd never heard that music before. And so I tried to remember it, and I sang it to myself, hummed it to myself, and I got back to the house, and I don't write music. Never have been able to write music. But I sat down and made a bunch of notations so I wouldn't forget it. I made ups and downs and pauses and things, and sang it up to myself. And then once I got that done, words started coming in. And so I scribbled out all the words. I mean, all this happened in half an hour after I got home. And that was in like 1975 or 76. And, of course, I have a bad voice, singing voice, but I sing it to myself until I memorize it. And then years later in Indianapolis, I had a friend who could sing, and I sang it to him, and he took it and sang it pretty well. I have recordings of that even. And in fact, he told me years later, he said, "Arlan, this song has become like a national anthem for the pagan community." He said, "I sing it at pagan meetings here in the Midwest, and people like it." And, well, that's good. Okay. Fast forward then in the 1980s to, I'm trying to remember, I guess it's 2012. I was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia with a friend, and we were coming back from a science fiction conference over there. And I was telling her about the music and that story. She wanted to know. So I hummed it to her, gave her the lyrics, and gave her that guy's tape that he had made back in the 80s. And so, long story shorter, we put it together. She made a video of it. She sings it, made a video of it. It's on YouTube. It's called Ancient Ages. Her name is Dr. Catherine Asaro, A-S-A-R-O. And you can look that up on YouTube. And, she tweaked a little bit of it, changed the word just a little bit. We got some visuals, and she had some orchestration behind it. And what she produced is a beautiful song. It's more civilized than what I heard. Could get that quite across there. That what I heard was absolutely, insanely wild, pagan, animalistic. But it's close enough. What you see on YouTube is a civilized version of that. Where that inspiration came from, I have no idea. I was in the middle of the storm, almost afraid for my life with the lightning and the wind and the rain blowing my little car around. And all that hit all at once in less time than I'm telling you. I got home, wrote it down, and 30-something years later, she comes out with a song on it. Now, I did a whole bunch of funny country western songs, and my friend sang a couple of them for his country western band he had back there. But where that comes from, I have no idea. I have no idea where that comes from because I never played. My brothers all played instruments and sang a couple of them professionally. I've never been able to play anything, but I hear music. And anyhow, I don't know where the creativity comes from. I have no idea. A lot of people I've talked to think, there is a common Akashic records, some kind of place where all human thought, consciousness resides, and sometimes we tap into that. I will say one thing about weird stuff. There was I had an experience when I was in with Chris Dunn over in Egypt. We were in the Ramesseum, I think it was, one of those temples, and there was a statue. I think it was Sekhmet, the cat goddess, made of black obsidian or something. When I stood in front of that thing, I felt a power, an emotion or something. I thought, whoa, what the heck is this? I've never had done that around any inanimate object before. I was wondering, if all the people that worshiped this statue in the past had left their impressions on it in some fashion or something. But I actually felt that. I thought, wow, what I wish, I've written articles about it before, what I really wish is that real scientists would start taking measurements about things and see what it is that the human nervous system interacts with. But I don't believe in anything supernatural. I just believe in things we don't understand yet. There might be things we never can understand, never will understand. But as far as we go, reason and logic are pretty good tools for little monkey brains that we have. Aliens and other creatures might have other ways of knowing and ways of experiencing the universe, but I wish we'd studied it.
Arlan, did you see anything emanating from this statue, or you just felt? Like,
I don't know how to describe it. When I got close to it, it just felt like an emanation, like there was something there. Not like magnetism or anything, but just like somehow it was affecting my nervous system. That's what it felt like. A lot to say. And it's strange. I never had that. So you wonder sometimes when those people were worshiping these ancient idols and gods and things, if maybe somebody do something, took a special kind of stone brick, carved it into a shape, and other people felt the same thing when they. It was probably I don't know what it was. It was something, an experience I never had before or since. But it was. I wanted to say that because I do think there are things that we don't understand. I don't think they're religious or supernatural. They're just there. It's up to us to try to understand it, I think.
Okay, and since you were just talking about this unusual experience, being in close proximity to this statue, you also worked with the author of the book that the movie Poltergeist was based on. Did you learn anything that may explain the situation from Egypt, or were you able to apply communication through TV with just the fuzz on it, so something like that? Did you learn something by working with that author?
Well, that was Dr. Bill Roll. My wife and I worked with him in North Carolina. I was on the board of the Ryan Research Institute, that investigates all that kind of weird stuff, and that would be another whole program to talk to you about. But I've been involved. We were involved in the Poltergeist investigation with Bill Roll at the Soldiers and Airmen's Home up in Washington, D.C. back in 1976. And the quartermaster of the group, or U.S. Army Colonel, had us all in and did a study. We had psychics there. I was not one. I was just one of the control people, But we learned that. I think I learned that there are there are entities. There are some things that survive after death, the material world, the physical world, and sometimes we don't like what they do. That's what I'm saying. The first thing I ever wrote was published in 1972. It's called Toward a Unified Parascience. It was in Fate magazine. And in there, I asked if the scientific world should investigate people who are dying with their permission, of course, and instrument it. I said, if we have instruments that can determine that all the properties of Mars and Venus and stars and everything else, why don't we use some of those instruments to look at a human body at death and see what happens? And that would be the most important discovery we could ever make. And I did see a thing last week, finally, that they are actually doing studies of brains, human brains, as people are dying. That's the first time that I've ever seen anything like that. It's taken 50 years, but they're finally starting to do some of it. I believe reality. I think reality
is it like a CAT scan?
It's actually within the last few days. I think it was a New Scientist magazine reported. I've subscribed to that, and they were actually doing all kinds of scans of brains. Yeah, they had permission to do it. They watch what happens at the moment people die, and the brain activity, and all the other things. Now, at the time, I suggested that there's a conservation of consciousness. I was thinking about tiny magnetic field. I didn't think about the quantum level, but there could be that a consciousness, is embedded at a quantum level somewhere, and that when the meat body dies, the quantum survive. I've written an article about that before. Carl Sagan said in the old Cosmos program, if you could go at the speed of light, it would look like you're in a tunnel, and there'd be a bright light at the end. And what does that sound like? That sounds like the stuff I was reading by Dr. Moody up in Virginia at the time about the near-death experiences where people see a bright light going through a tunnel. Mm-hmm. So it sounded to me. I wrote an article years ago called "Is There Light After Death?" And it could be that, if we're electromagnetic beings and we travel at the speed of light, when you die, you pop out to the universe and you get to go forever. That would be cool. I guess if you don't have the right attitude, you might wind up in a black hole, where I hope that Putin and Stalin and Hitler and these guys would be.
Well, you also get to make a rejoinder to what you just said. The evidence of the Shroud of Turin seems like it's just a burst of light where Jesus isn't, or whoever the burial shroud was around, the person is not laying down; they're floating, and the shroud is singed. It's not painted, so it seems like there was this burst of light energy, whatever the correct term is, that created the image on the shroud. It sounds like take your experience and go back, or your thesis, and go back to look at the one example from maybe about 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, like I said, reality is a lot broader than we've been taught, and I want, as I mentioned before in our previous conversation with you, that I knew early on, even though I was getting a doctor's degree in engineering, I was never going to be a world-class, scientist or engineer. But I could go look at those little dark corners that Charles Fort used to talk about. There's a bright light overhead, but there's always a dark corner somewhere. Sometimes you look at those dark corners, there might be things crawling around there, or things wiggling around. And you look at those dark corners, and you might be the first to find something. I decided with ghost stories in the family. I mean, my great-grandparents could have lived in Indian territory if they wanted to, but they decided to stay in rural Arkansas. So I heard all these stories about the Cherokees. I heard all these stories about magic and ghosts and hates and all the different things. And I was always interested in the weird stuff. And so in addition to my professional career, I've always spent the rest of my time on the weird things, looking at those dark corners. It's interesting, like in the book on Killarumiyoq there, that I can apply my education and my training to look at those things and shed light on them, literally. And in my science fiction, I come up with new concepts I hope people will listen to and maybe expand their mind or at least have fun with it. And the music is weird. I have no idea where it comes from. And all the psychic stuff and UFO things I've done. It just, to me, it's all one spectrum. There's nothing outside of it. I mean, I love to read about, quantum physics and astronomy and SpaceX and exploration, but I also like to read about poltergeists and ghosts and cryptids and, there's so many things that have been involved. We've been on Bigfoot hunts. We've done haunted house investigations. I have watched poltergeist phenomena. I've had precognitive dreams that were very detailed that occurred later. That changed my. I had precognitive dreams that told me something's going to happen, and then I changed my behavior to watch it happen and make it turn out the way I wanted it. No, I can't do lotto numbers. Believe me, if I could do lotto numbers, I would have done that a long time ago. But
no, I was just going to say, did you have a precognitive dream that you're going to have millions of dollars of book sales immediately after the show ends? And
yeah, I wish. Main thing is I would like a lot of people to read the stuff. I'd like to get their comments about their thoughts and what my thoughts were.
Oh, I really enjoyed both books.
The Killarumiyoq book, I really hope to get it in front of people who can do something about it, to go down and scan that whole thing with a 3D laser scanner, get a point cloud to get the exact dimensions, then run it through and see what it really does. On the science fiction stuff, I just want people to enjoy it, read it, speculate. Like I said, I have a different take on science fiction. I have a lot of friends who write science fiction. I don't knock what they do. If they can make money at it and the people like it, that's fine. I'm a big fan of alternate history myself. I love what would have happened if this had happened instead of that. And I like that. And but I'm very, very, very tired of Star Wars and Star Trek ripoffs. Like Guardians of the Galaxy, I can read. That can be fun. It's not a big deal. I can enjoy a lot of stuff in movies I won't bother to read. I mean, I used to know George Martin, and I enjoyed most of the Game of Thrones TV show. I don't read fantasy, but I enjoy watching it. And I love The Expanse on television, the best science fiction that's ever on television. I like For All Mankind, which is alternate history. But I'm just tired of space assassins and special forces teams and Star Wars and Star Trek and all that. I'm glad people like it. I have friends that make a living at it, and I appreciate it. I'm glad they do. It's just not for me.
You have something unique going on, and I'm appreciative that you had a chance to be a guest and discuss Thaw and the Shadowlands or Shadowfall trilogy with us. And Arlan, we're down to about 3 minutes, and since you were talking about shining a light into dark corners, what's going on with the Ancient Kentucky monthly meetings with Lee Pennington and Jill Baker's meetings at their homes?
Yeah, I've been going there. We moved to Kentucky here about 8 years ago, and I've been going over there ever since. But until recently, we have different speakers to come in and talk about different things. Some of the people we've had in before, you've had on your show before, Mark Nicholas, and
Lori.
We did an expanded version of that book, Chasing Dragons. I was the editor of that. We greatly expanded that, and I'd like to see their findings about Cahokia made into the archaeological record as real. The first time the Chinese spread a deadly plague in North America in the 1400s, in addition to the year 2020. But we have different speakers come in and talk about weird stuff. I've made a couple presentations. I made 2 presentations on this book, once before it was out and once when it was out. I've talked about different things, and Lee Pennington, of course, has always got something fascinating going on. And the most interesting thing about all of it, the background of all of it, was that the thesis of Lee's work here is that King Arthur, there were 2 King Arthurs. One of them actually came to North America, was killed by Indians, Native Americans here. His body was taken back to Wales and buried. And that's a fascinating story all by itself. I'd like to see a movie. I'd like to see a documentary on it, but I'd also like to see a fictional movie on that. Adventure movie. There couldn't be a better adventure than King Arthur coming to North America and fighting Indians and being killed and wrapped up in a deer skin.
Hey, Arlan, we're down to 1 minute.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for being such a fascinating guest tonight, and I enjoyed your books. Is there, quickly, are you able to say the best place to get your books, and then we'll say goodnight?
Okay, Amazon.com has got all these books and more. I've got some other science fiction books out there, ebooks and paperback books. So I'd appreciate, if anybody does buy them, I would appreciate a review if you like it. If you don't like it, don't do a review.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you, Arlan. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We'll have you come back. I really had a great time with reading the canon. So good night, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you. Good.